Good morning, everyone. We are here today to talk a little bit about verbs. Your lesson for today is about transitive verbs. And so I wanted to do a little review with you before you try to dive into that lesson and do a little explaining. So maybe that will help you when you try to do today's lesson and tomorrow's lesson. So just a quick review about verbs. If you remember, we've been talking about action verbs. We've been talking about verbs that portray action, like to sing, to dance, to jump, to laugh, to swing. All of those things are actions that we do. There are two big categories of verbs. You can see them on my little handy dandy whiteboard here. On the left side, you can see the word action verb. And on the right side in the flow chart, you see linking. We're only going to be talking about the left side of this chart for right now. We're only talking about action verbs. I want you to just completely forget about linking verbs for at least today and tomorrow. Okay? The only verbs that can be transitive, which are verbs we're talking about today, transitive verbs, are verbs that are action verbs. Action verbs can be divided into two categories. They can be transitive or they can be intransitive. Today, your lesson is about transitive verbs. Transitive action verbs must have a direct object, because really what's going on with this verb is that there's a transference of action from the subject of the sentence to the receiver, which is the direct object. So without that direct object to receive that transference, you can't have a transitive verb. Okay, so let me repeat that. You have to have a receiver, or another term for a receiver is the direct object. Now, if you have an action verb and there is no direct object, then that's called an intransitive verb. So today's lesson is only on transitive verbs, and then tomorrow when you work on the next lesson, or you can do them both today if you want, when you turn the page and go on to the next lesson, you'll see that it's on intransitive verbs. And it's actually easier just to practice transitive verbs by themselves and get really good at that, and then move on to intransitive verbs. Okay? So again, a transitive verb has a direct object, and an intransitive verb has no direct object, but they are always action verbs. So I'm going to turn this around and show you what I put on the back. You just saw my handy dandy vacuum cleaner there. Okay, so this is the whiteboard that shows some examples of transitive verbs. Okay, it says first off it has to be an action verb, which we've already talked about. Do that. And secondly, it must have a direct object to be transitive. Okay, we talked about that. So here are a couple of examples, and I wanted to use some different kinds of verbs and in some different tenses so that you would see that tense really doesn't have anything to do with whether it's transitive or intransitive. Okay, so the very first example is Sam hit the ball. The subject is Sam and the verb is hit. It's an action verb, and ball is the direct object. So very simple transference from Sam the subject to the receiver, which is ball, and that makes hit a transitive active action verb. The second example is Mom was baking the cookies. Now this is a different tense because it's a past participle. You'll notice it has the helping verb was, and the to bake ends in an ing, so it's past participle use of that. Past present participle is what we call that. But it doesn't matter because it's still an action verb. We still have the subject mom who is performing the action of baking, and we have a direct object. And the direct object, or the receiver of that action in this sentence, is cookies. So we have mom was baking what? The cookies. So the cookies is the direct object. So just to recap, for an action verb to be transitive, first off, it has to be an action verb. It's a linking verb. This doesn't apply to those kind of verbs. It only applies to action verbs. And then for it to be transitive, it has to have a direct object. So when you get to the intransitive lesson, it will be pretty easy because I'll show you some examples of where you still have an action verb, but you'll notice right away that you do not have a direct object. Instead of having a direct object at the end of the sentence, you're going to notice things like prepositional phrases or adverbs or something like that complete the sentence. But you'll notice that there is no direct object if it's intransitive.